So from filmmaker Michael Mann comes a Los Angeles crime saga that brought together two of the greatest actors of a generation, and still remains one of the most influential films of its kind. This is Heat. On the streets of Los Angeles, when professional thief McCauley and his expert crew perpetrate an armed robbery to lift $1.6 million in bearer bonds, the heist escalates into a triple homicide due to the impulsive trigger of the outsider Wayne Gro. When McCauley ultimately attempts to kill their new liability, Wayne Gro escapes. Meanwhile, the high-profile robbery-homicide attracts LAPD Lieutenant Vincent Hanna's dogged interest, and he and his team begin to systematically deconstruct the nature of the crime and the players involved. Yet where their professional lives are focused and intense, the personal lives of Hanna and McCauley take adverse turns, with women that offer them something that may not be wholly compatible with their violent professions. Despite McCauley and his crew making the LAPD being onto their scores, they push forward with a more ambitious heist that puts them into further risk. Wayne Gro, siding with the money launderer Roger Van Zandt, whose bearer bonds were stolen in the armored car robbery, helps to expose their plans to the LAPD and puts them into dire peril. With lives being lost, the urgency of Neil to escape is equaled by Hanna's determination to track him and his remaining partners down. Soon these complex and driven criminals and lawmen will collide across the landscape of Los Angeles, with none left unaffected by the damage left in their wake. So being released on the 15th of December 1995, Michael Mann's Heat was met with immediate acclaim from critics and audiences alike, garnering $187 million at the worldwide box office off of a $60 million budget. It was a very long process getting this film from its initial inception with a screenplay to the final film we got in 1995, which pretty much started off with real-life Chicago cop Chuck Adamson relaying his stories to Michael Mann about the real-life professional criminal Neil McCauley in 1960 Chicago, how he tracked him, met him, and finally gunned him down in 1964, and many of the events that Chuck Adamson relayed to Michael Mann became part of the overall fiber of this film, and that was written initially in the late 70s before Michael Mann had done his original feature film directorial debut Thief. And after he'd done Thief, he tried to kind of revisit the screenplay and tried to get his friend Walter Hill to actually direct it, which didn't quite work out. He wasn't very much interested in developing the screenplay with him. And so the thing kind of sat around and went through whatever it went through the next couple of years after he did The Keep and Manhunter, and he was working on Miami Vice and Crime Story. And finally, in 1989, he was actually able to produce an abbreviated version of the screenplay into the television film LA Takedown, which Michael Mann kind of reviews in retrospect as sort of a prototype version of Heat, which he would kind of like to be able to do on all of his films, to kind of make a version of the film that's a little bit more kind of a way to kind of work with the material and see what works, see what doesn't work, kind of work around it, kind of feel it, see how it functions overall. And LA Takedown is a film that really was made a bit more in a run-and-gun type of fashion, had about 10 days worth of prep and about 19-day shooting schedule, so not a lot of time to really kind of do much with it. And like I said, there was a lot of material that does not appear in LA Takedown that does appear in Heat. And so after LA Takedown kind of came and went, Michael Mann then did The Last of the Mohicans, which garnered him a lot of acclaim and certainly improved his stature in Hollywood. And so after talking with his friend, producer Art Linson, who actually read the full screenplay of Heat, he told Michael Mann that this was the film that he needed to make next, and it was indeed the top two choices to portray the leads of this film, being Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, signing on to this film and making everything move forward with the momentum it needed to make this film the fantastic piece of work that I believe it absolutely positively is. And one of the main driving ideas that eventually came to Michael Mann in developing the screenplay was the sort of parallel nature between the cops and the criminals in this film, especially between Detective Vincent Hanna and professional thief Neil McCauley, to show the level of expertise and the similarities between these very starkly different ends of the law that these two characters very much inhabit in very unique type of ways that very much reflect upon one another. And you can see that very early on in the film with how the armored car robbery is executed with the precision that his crew of Neil McCauley actually goes ahead and develops this entire heist, and how it eventually is easily, expertly deconstructed by Vincent Hanna. Once he appears on the scene, he starts deconstructing all the little mechanical elements and all the psychology that went into every single move and every single action, how it elevated from a simple armored robbery to a triple homicide. He connects all the dots very easily and gets his crew, which is also as much of an expert crew as McCauley's, just on the opposite side of the law, trying to put together all the elements of this crime. You see just right from the beginning of the film, you're dealing with equal sides of the spectrum and just two sides of the coin that just work on such great, magnificent levels with all their expertise, their savvy, and their insight and knowledge into the very professions that they claim as their own. So it really is a very interesting cat and mouse game where both sides have equal levels of experience, equal levels of resources and intelligence and cunning overall. It just really works very well to kind of create such an interesting dynamic that not one side has so much of an advantage over the other. They eventually both catch up a little bit at a time on each side of the thing. It's very much an interesting dynamic to see how that eventually plays out, which continues to focus in on Hanna and McCauley throughout the entire film, and is further reflected in their love lives, where you have Hanna in this very dysfunctional marriage where this guy's heightened experience of his life is being a cop, being out there in the streets, tracking these guys down, running around their block, trying to get all these criminals, being in that life. And when he comes home to his wife, he is completely emotionally unavailable because he's entirely spent. There's nothing left to give. It's all internalized within him. So the marriage just doesn't function, and it is his third that he's on. So it just shows this guy is someone who just can't make himself emotionally available to the woman that he is married to. Meanwhile, you have Neil McCauley, who is just beginning to kind of open up his life a little bit to someone he met in terms of Edie, to kind of welcome something else into his life that feels natural and pure and separated from everything else that kind of dictates the rest of his life. And so they have this sort of interesting sort of way these two characters kind of move along in the whole film, where you have this downslope of marriage on one side, but something else is kind of ascending throughout the whole film to a certain point, and in between that, you just have these two characters meet, and it has such a great dynamic throughout the whole film, where their love lives actually have the opposite effect on their professional lives, where Hannah's love life is falling apart, but his profession is focused and determined and dedicated, while McCauley's love life is ascending, becoming something so much greater, but is actually compromising his professional life in little ways as the film goes along. So you see how these things have adverse reactions in both good and bad ways upon these characters, who are absolutely fantastically portrayed, again, by two of the greatest actors of a generation, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And Al Pacino's Vincent Hanna is such a great, interesting, and perfectly Pacino type of character who has all that great sort of passion and electric chemistry and charisma on screen, but also has such a great depth, these lower moments in the film where he feels weary. He feels like he's kind of burned down a little bit. He has that sort of way that he is dragged down a little bit by the exhausting nature of his life, and it's just that great quality about this character where he kind of internalizes so much of what he experiences as a cop and kind of compartmentalizes his life emotionally, because all the emotion, all the passion, all the stuff he has to offer is all put into his job, while everything else outside of that, his personal life, none of that's there at all. And it's great seeing that kind of edge he gives to Vincent Hanna in certain scenes, especially when Vincent Hanna is working his CI of Albert Torina, kind of doing this sort of unpredictable, volatile, sort of spastic almost performance where he kind of keeps him off balance, where he can't work him too much, where Vincent has the guys in control and trying to exercise the authority in the situation to kind of wrangle his CI in. These great scenes where you just see Vincent Hanna as the player, this guy who can work a scene, kind of work the criminals and all the guys that kind of he has a little bit of on a leash, kind of keep them tight and kind of keep them wrangled in a certain way. Really good scenes there where you just get that kind of smoothness and that charisma working in there to see a little bit of another side of Vincent Hanna there. There's a lot of multifaceted qualities with this character, just with the fieriness that Pacino puts in the character and just the depth of layers that you get with the character overall, from the heightened experience of the guy who's sharp and passionate and focused on what he's doing, all the way through the entire drama that's going on with his home life, with his wife and his stepdaughter and all this type of stuff. It's just very great stuff that you get such a great actor here with Pacino, adding all these fantastic qualities. You can totally fully relate and sympathize and just be very much enraptured with what he's doing in this whole film. Every single moment you see him on screen, he just has that energy, that fire, and just tempers that with so many different things with the character of Hanna here to just make him a character that also never is desensitized to the stuff that he is dealing with, that he deals with a lot of dead bodies, a lot of grisly crimes and all this type of stuff, all this violence, but he's never a guy who loses his core of humanity. He's still someone who can feel, who can empathize to a degree, but there's still such a great difficulty for him to make himself emotionally available. It's all got to be internalized, all kind of, like he says, have that angst to kind of fuel him forward in what he does. The character of Vincent Hanna is so exquisitely well written, and Al Pacino was absolutely perfectly cast and perfectly the right guy to bring all the qualities that bring this character to such a great, fantastic life on screen. And you could not ask for the better actor to work opposite Al Pacino than the magnificent Robert De Niro, still in a very strong prime of his career here, delivering one of his best performances, I feel, because it just takes advantage of so much more of what Robert De Niro can really bring to a role, from a guy who has that sort of cold, isolated, calculated type of feel, to develop him to such a guy that you can feel has a sense of warmth, a sense of humanity with him, mixed in with all this violence and grisliness and all this fantastically complex type of stuff that he has to deal with, and how he is presented in the film, because we see early on that he is accomplice to murder. He'll facilitate a triple homicide if it serves his purpose, but it's so much of a good thing that Michael Mann is able to take this character and humanize him and not paint him with such a stark brush. There is fine layers and details and shades to this character that end up getting peeled back as the film goes along, and there's so much due to Robert De Niro's performance here, who just commands the screen every time he's in front of it. He just delivers so many very interesting qualities, and just the character of Neil is such a fascinating, authentic type of character as well, because Michael Mann has spent a lot of time researching stuff all the way back from when he did the television film Jericho Mile. He definitely researched a lot of stuff with convicts and thieves and criminals to really understand the psychology of them, how they work, how they think, how they function, how they work in life, and all these different types of things. This is a culmination of even stuff that was even started all the way back with James Caan and Thief. This is a far more refined, dimensional, and sophisticated version of that type of character. And we see the character of Neil McCauley as first off, as a very rigid, uniform type of character who lives a very narrow and sparse lifestyle, living by the credence of don't let yourself get attached to anything you're not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner. And as the film does go along, you start to see, like when he gets into the relationship with Edie, how that starts to kind of break his code. Now he is getting attached to someone that can compromise that type of situation, compromise his own mentality, his sensibility, is able to make very clear-cut, calculated decisions, is very much forcing him to branch out and kind of veer off the track, and that continues throughout the whole film to kind of branch out further and further, veer off that type of course to eventual end that is not very satisfying for himself, but is such a very interesting way of how this character just progresses throughout the whole film, that once he starts to invite a little sense of humanity into himself, it starts to kind of veer him so much off course that he doesn't have a focus anymore. He's being very much driven by emotion and impulse, and being able to force himself to do things that he normally wouldn't do if he was thinking with that very clear cut type of mindset that he started out the film with. It's very interesting how you see the character of Neil at the end of the film versus how he was at the beginning of the film. It's such a fantastic arc in the film that Robert De Niro portrays with such amazing subtlety. There's so many moments in the film where you just see just a look in his eye or something like that that just expresses so much without him having to say anything or do much of anything on screen. He's able to project that with just the simplest little subtle things in his performance, and how he carries himself and all these different things that are built into the fiber of the character, the background they kind of build for the character of Neil McCauley, and how De Niro just absorbs himself into the fiber of this guy who just has that rigid sensibility and just kind of has this great swagger and this presence and all this great type of commanding authority in the film. He has so many great aspects to him, between the sort of more sympathetic air that he gets when he builds that relationship with Edie, and the much more fearsome type of stuff you see when he's dealing with guys like Roger Van Zant, or when he gets into a firefight in the film, or dealing with Wayne Gro. There's such a great complexity overall and such a wide range that De Niro is able to show here, that he does come through as one of the most impressive performances that I think he's ever had in his career, that might go a bit overlooked, but it is a great thing to see a subtle performance that really just strikes so many great chords throughout the whole film. I think both him and Pacino just deliver such great work in this film, adding so much depth and layers and emotion, so many complex elements to these characters who are ultimately very much two sides of the same coin. These two guys who are so dedicated to their jobs, are so focused that they kind of sacrifice everything else in their lives in very different fashions. These two guys in the world of this film are the only two guys like each other, and such a unique quality that these characters just progress through the whole film to create that type of synergy, that symmetry throughout the entire experience, the entire journey this film takes these characters on. There's such a great communal experience that you get by the end of this film between these two characters. It creates the nucleus that this film just builds its entire sensibility around and drives you forward towards that much more intimate type of storyline. That there are so many great characters in the film portrayed by fantastic actors, but it really just comes down to these two characters so much in this film that the entire film hinges so much on that great type of quality between them. But that is not to discount the fantastic cast you have throughout this entire film. I love Val Kilmer's performance in this film. It's very interesting that he was kind of shooting this film concurrently with Batman Forever. That he's actually kind of working both films at the same time and still delivering a fantastic performance for Michael Mann in this film. That it very much is the characters portrayed by Val Kilmer and Ashley Judd in this film that create the relationship that I find the most interesting, the most satisfying, the one I really like the most in this film overall, because, like I've said, there's such a great parallel sort of thing going on with Neil and Hannah's sort of relationships in their love lives, but the relationship between the characters, Chris and Charlene Shaherless, it has a great core that you end up seeing stripped down by the end of the film, that these two characters really do have a great love for one another, great affection. They care for each other so much, but there's so much of this compulsive, addictive gambling behavior by the character of Chris Shaherless that creates this conflict, that just creates so much turbulence between these two characters that starts to drive them apart. And there's so much interesting qualities. I just love what this type of pairing in the film really brings to the overall sense of this film, where you have all these other relationships that are working and not working and going on very different types of journeys. This one takes on a very different type of complexion, where they really do kind of strip everything away by the end of the film, and you see that once all the junk, all the deception, all the sort of cheating, the infidelity, all this type of stuff, all the gambling, the addiction type of stuff, all the stuff that has created such a conflict between them is stripped away just in that wonderful moment where you see Charlene up on that balcony where she's got all the cops in there waiting to take Chris in. You just see the magnificently emotional beat where she just waves him away and tells him he has to run. And just the expressions on their faces are absolutely heartbreaking. Every time you cut to one or the other, you just see the life drain out of them, how much these two people actually mean to one another once all the other stuff is just kind of expelled from their lives. When it just comes down to it, they really did love each other so much, and it is something that could survive if it wasn't for all this other stuff poisoning the rest of their lives and forcing all this crime and all this stuff going on between them. Is really much my favorite relationship that progresses all the whole film, and two fantastic actors, Ashley Judd, Val Kilmer, very much in top form here. I love what they do all the way through this whole film. And then you got like a character portrayed by Kevin Gage in this film of Wayne Gro, who is just frighteningly authentic in every type of way. This guy is one of the most interesting characters in the film as well, because I've always viewed this character as the catalyst. He is the guy who creates and instigates all the real major plot turns in the film, because he is the guy who offs the security guard at the beginning of the film that turns it into a triple homicide instead of just an armed robbery. So it just elevates further the high-profile nature of their crime to get Vincent and Hannah even more so on their tail. If it was just an armored robbery, it might not have escalated to this level of dedication and very much thorough intensity from Hannah to track these guys down. But Wayne Gro escalated the situation and continues to escalate the situation every time he shows up on screen. You see that he's a killer of prostitutes. He ends up working with Roger Van Zant, who Van Zant screwed over Neil McCauley, trying to kill him for trying to steal his bearer bonds and everything, and just creates all these little twists and turns in the story, and is absolutely the one guy who just absolutely drives the narrative forward from sort of a backseat sort of fashion. It's such an interesting character that just creates all the waves in the film to kind of direct the plot where it really needs to drive it to, and forces adverse actions for characters to take, especially Neil McCauley himself. It is that stinging point of Wayne Gro that pushes him just towards that edge to take that last wrong choice to take him towards the end of the film. Again, frightening portrayal of this really scary, authentic sort of ex-con character who just, you can see right from the beginning of the film, he doesn't feel like he fits in McCauley's crew, and that's because they just got him in there so they could pay off a debt to someone. So there's this very interesting character of Wayne Gro who Kevin Gage portrays magnificently, and very interesting that Kevin Gage, several years after this, would end up going to prison for cultivating marijuana in California, and has spent almost 2 years in prison for it. So it's a kind of an interesting real-life parallel there in a certain way. But he's still working today as an actor, so good on him for that, to keep going forward after that little setback he had. But in this film, just absolutely just so much pulled from so much of a real-life character named Wayne Gro, who did not have a good end, who ended up having a very lethal, terrible end to his life by some very nasty individuals. But in this film, the character of Wayne Gro is a very essential part of this plot and very exceptionally well portrayed. And someone else in this film, Jon Voight, was a fantastic addition to this cast that even Jon Voight, when he was reading the script, is like, Michael, you can probably get a whole bunch of other actors who can portray this probably maybe even better than I could. But Michael Mann so much just wanted to work with Jon Voight, and I think he brings such a great quality to this character of Nate, this guy who kind of works sort of the works out all the sort of logistics and all the sort of fencing of goods and everything that McCauley's crew gets, and he has such a brotherly bond that is so very touching and heartwarming. It's a very interesting type of quality. It's like another one of the great relationships in this film. The few moments he gets opposite Robert De Niro in this film just evokes a great quality that he's a guy who doesn't judge. He doesn't try to change anyone's mind, convince anyone of anything else than what they want to do. He respects guys like Chris Shiherlis and Neil McCauley to make their own decisions and work with their own consequences. He respects them enough to give them what they need. He gives Neil the information about where Wayne Gro is, even though he doesn't think it's a good idea for him to go off and track him down. But he treats him like a man, treats him with respect, and I think there's just a great heartwarming quality that you get from Jon Voight's portrayal here, even with all this sort of makeup prosthetics on his face to really kind of give him a different type of older, gentlemanly feel to him, and just a great character that I've always been attracted to throughout this whole film. Every time I've watched it, there's such a great moment where you just have that final little phone call send off between the two characters. Just has a slight bit of heartbreaking quality that I think just is hit on so magnificently well between these portrayals of these characters. And overall, there's just such great talent in this film, top to bottom. You've got fantastic piece of work from Tom Sizemore. You get guys like Ted Levine and Wes Studi, and even a young Natalie Portman coming pretty fresh off Leon the Professional, doing a nice little piece of work here with only about like 3 scenes. It's easy to kind of forget her in a certain way because she doesn't have that much screen time, but she has such a profound impact on the film by the end of it. There's so many great performances here that is hard to hit on everyone, but you got Amy Brenneman as Edie, just creating that fantastically interesting character who's so much detached from this world of crime and cops and all this type of stuff. It creates such a refreshing quality. You can see why a character like Neil would be attracted to her, because she isn't part of that. You can kind of have that detachment. If he goes away with this woman, he can live free of that type of world and not think of it really ever again. So it's so many great little things that she brings a heart, she brings an innocence, she brings a charm, she brings such a authentic type of feel that has a bit of a revulsion towards the violence, but it's such an interesting way how these two characters just end up gelling with one another. There's such great performances that, again, such a fantastically well done cast. But the characters in this film that are the women are not portrayed as brush-offs. They're not portrayed as thin or weak. They're very strong characters who bring so much great assertiveness, so much great confidence, so much great sort of self-sufficiency to themselves. They know what they want. They know what makes their worlds function. I love what Diane Venora really brings to her character. It's just such a good type of thing that the character of Justine is a strong character that can stand up against Al Pacino's Vincent Hanna and have these great moments throughout the whole film. The cast of this film just goes on and on to such great degrees. There is not a single weak link anywhere in any part of this cast in any shape, way, or form. This is a magnificently well put together cast. From everyone that was involved with this film, hit every single role with the absolute right possible actor. I cannot imagine this film being recast in any fashion whatsoever. Everyone hit their beats magnificently well. The acting in this film is on top-notch form, and everyone is directed so magnificently well, with the depth and nuance of all their characters completely in line with Michael Mann's vision. And the excellent cinematographer of Dante Spinotti returns to work with Michael Mann again after Manhunter and Last of the Mohicans. And Mann has always been known as a filmmaker of innovative style, and here it's a little bit more subtle than like the bright neons of Manhunter or the very heavy neo-noir sleekness of Thief. But there's such a great sort of refined and more evolved version of his sleekness present in this film in so many different ways, and the cinematography catches some really magnificent images in this film. Michael Mann always used to know how to capture wonderful vistas, just create some very striking images in this film. And Alice Covell's Pacific was one of the most inspiring images that continued to keep Mann interested in this project throughout the whole years, as that image was recreated with one of the most iconic ones in the film of just Neil McCauley going to his home at night with that blue saturation, the gun on the table, and him just having that stoic sort of isolation, that loneliness, that interesting simplicity that this film can convey just with simple images that just strike out at you and just tells you so much about the situations and the characters and relationships in this film. Things are so much composed, even to use architecture in very interesting type of fashions, where you can have certain lines in the architecture kind of create interesting energy, even if there isn't really anything physically happening in the scene. You can just create some very interesting type of things with how the architecture and the geometry of things really kind of juxtaposes against the people in the scene, and how overall the film just has a very interesting sort of fantastic, simple neo-noir contemporary feel to it that still stands up so much after 20 years. It still looks like such a modern, well-polished, refined, sophisticated type of crime film that creates such a great sense about itself with its cinematography that never becomes overtly stylish, but you can still see Michael Mann's touches and how things are photographed, how things are composed, and how all the things come together with the editing of this film, which there are many editors on this film working in rolling 24-hour shifts that kind of get this whole thing put together, because Mann was so enthusiastic about getting it out. This whole film just comes together so very well with how it is shot, creating some very great nighttime sequences that just show off the backdrop of Los Angeles with some shimmering qualities, and just using the backdrop of Los Angeles to kind of be a fantastic character in its own right in this film, to make it its own sort of sensibility that you couldn't just transplant this into any other city. It's so much, very much in the fabric and fiber of what Los Angeles is. And Michael Mann has such a great perspective on how Los Angeles, how its landscape kind of melds and changes and kind of works, and has all these different layers from the ground to the sky, all the air traffic, all those types of things that he has as a perception of how Los Angeles looks and how it functions and how it kind of is kind of disparate in certain places. It definitely comes to fruition in some of his other films, including Collateral. But Heat uses Los Angeles so very well to tell its story and have it such a very intrinsic part of how this film comes together with all these different elements, and creating such that great sort of sleek sort of edge to it as well, where you have certain sequences on the highway or whatnot when you get the great music of Moby kicking in there, the cover of New Dawn Fades from Joy Division. It just adds that sort of almost like a Miami Vice feel to it. You would have seen something like that in Miami Vice. Just kind of this edgy sort of new wave type of electronic track just barreling down the highway or whatnot. Really good type of sensibility that is very much Michael Mann. And the music in this film is a collaboration of a lot of different sort of original music by fantastic composer Elliot Goldenthal, and some licensed tracks, some other compositions created for the film that create such a fantastic, interesting tapestry that even if you listen to the soundtrack and see that there's so many different artists involved, you might think it just wouldn't really come together. But so much of it is so much in the same vein, and so much complements the qualities and the style of the film so much. It comes together with so much emotion and depth and subtlety, but also such great driving tracks in this film, and such beautiful tracks as well. The other Moby song in the film, God Moving Over the Face of the Waters, that accompanies the final moments of the film, creates just a great, fantastic aura to it all, just a fantastic ethereal fashion and sensibility just going off on that note. It has such a great cinematic quality. And like Goldenthал's music in the film just creates that great underscore, that great feeling that it kind of rises up and gives you that emotion in the film at certain points in time. There's so many good tracks used in the film so very well to create an overall cohesive sense of what Michael Mann wanted to do with this film, to create a very good sonic experience, which extends even beyond the music in this film. That when you get into that magnificent sort of climax of the second act, which is the heist sequence that elevates, escalates into that gunfight, that shootout in the streets of Los Angeles. First off, the entire sequence is masterfully put together, just from the beginning of Brian Eno's track in the film, just hitting those nice beats, that nice pulsating rhythm that track gives the whole thing right when they're entering the bank, and how it just flows through all the way until everything explodes into a hail of gunfire. And apparently in post-production, they're kind of throwing around a couple different pieces of sound mix and sound effects and everything. They're trying to replace the audio that was done on set, on location, in the streets of Los Angeles. But Michael Mann, just like none of the stock stuff, had the visceral veracity and the power of the production audio of these guns echoing off the buildings in downtown Los Angeles, which is also very interesting that it was very difficult to actually shoot the sequence because they could only do it on weekends, and one of those weekends ended up being Mother's Day. So all these families and mothers and everything are out enjoying their dinners and everything on this very special day. You got Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Val Kilmer out in the streets blistering your eardrums and everything, and that completely comes across in the film so much. The blistering sonic impact of those guns in the film. You have not heard anything like it on the Blu-ray itself. It just absolutely strikes out as the most bombastic piece of sound you have possibly ever heard in a gunfight in a film, because it is so authentic. It's so absolutely visceral and impactful. It just creates the terror of the sequence, the fear that you have if you're in the scene, actually in that moment or whatnot, with all these gunfires, all this automatic fire, the shotguns, everything going off. You would be terrified to living shit. And that just comes across so much in just the pounding, intense sound mix of this film in that sequence. It creates such a fantastic thing that just creates such a great quality to an overall fantastic sequence, that this is again an action sequence that is shot so exquisitely well that you have a lot of handheld camera work in this, but it's nice long takes. You never have any disorientation about what's going on in the sequence. You have very solid visuals, solid compositions. You have a good geography of how everything is staged, and even if it is some quicker cutting, you still get the sense of how everything is progressing from one moment to the build-up, to the execution, to the climax of the sequence. Everything comes together so very well, and that's a sign of Michael Mann being a very solid director, having good cinematographers and very solid editors that know how to put together a very solid and fantastically intense sequence that just has you completely on the edge of your seat, how this thing is building up and how it ends up paying off throughout this entire sequence. And then you still have like another 45 minutes of this film left to go. And as one would expect, this film was very much heavily marketed as having Pacino and DeNiro acting on screen together for the very first time, because they both did star in The Godfather Part 2, but they portrayed characters in different time periods, so they never appeared on screen together. Heat is the first time these two actors actually got to share scenes together, and they don't have a lot, and the first scene they have together is not until over halfway into the film, but it's at the right exact point, and it services the characters in the perfect way possible, because as I said, the driving force for Michael Mann was seeing these characters as the only two guys like themselves within this world. These two guys, so much unique and so much not like anyone else in their lives, connect on a very interesting, personal, intimate level here in this scene, sharing things about themselves they don't share with anyone else in their lives, because there's almost no consequence between these two people. There's no real judgment being had here. You just have these two guys slowly building a rapport, a respect, a sort of communion between one another as the scene goes along, playing it subtle. And it's very interesting that Pacino and DeNiro did not rehearse this scene in advance. They wanted to go in as sort of separate as possible. They wanted to go in as unrehearsed as possible. Want to go in as raw as possible in a certain way, to just kind of know their lines, know what they had to do in the scene, but kind of working each other's reactions in a very genuine, natural, authentic type of fashion, just have it be very real on screen. And they actually shot the film with cameras simultaneously on Pacino and DeNiro, so they could have symmetry between the takes, to have each one have their genuine actual reactions to each other caught on film. And they did the scene very many times, and it's very interesting that even the restaurant that they shot in would actually have people wanting to call up and reserve the actual table that Pacino and DeNiro actually sat at for the scene. Sadly, the entire establishment, Kate Mandolini's, actually shut down some time ago, so no one can actually visit it as it was when this film was shot. But this whole sequence really just shows a weariness to the character of Vincent Hanna that really is just letting it all out on the table there, laying it all on the line, because at this point he's completely disconnected from his wife, can't talk to her, can't really unload all his emotional baggage on his fellow police officers. So the only guy he ends up really being able to connect with is the guy he's chasing down, the guy he wants to put in jail, the guy he wants to put in prison for as long as he possibly can. And just this interesting thing, how these two guys just absolutely completely connect with one another in this scene, just seeing how much alike they really are in the scene, and just having this fantastic chemistry between the two of them, just seeing how much they just can't be anything else than what they are in life, and just like sort of catch-22 is like, don't take down scores. Well, I don't know how to do anything but take down scores. I don't know how to do anything but be a cop. So it's like they're stuck doing this, and they kind of have a bit of that little smile in the scene. They're just like, we're caught in this shit. We don't have any other choice. And just like little beats and little moments and how they just share these nightmares that they have. It's just a interesting scene of these two guys sitting down having a cup of coffee, which Detective Chuck Adamson actually did with the real Neil McCauley back in the 60s. Chuck Adamson was actually going off to pick up his dry cleaning where he came across the real Neil McCauley, and he invited him to have coffee with him and have a very similar conversation with him. And eventually, like I said, ended up gunning the guy down in 1964. So you can see where the real life symmetry, art imitating real life, really came from there. And just like, you wouldn't really expect it unless it actually happened in real life. You wouldn't really buy it so much if it didn't come off so authentically well. And kind of harkening back a little to LA Takedown, this scene is also in that film, but you can just see the difference in the quality of acting from those actors who, again, are not on the level of Pacino and DeNiro. Also didn't have anywhere close to the amount of time that these two actors had to prepare for these roles and get into the depth of these characters, absorb into them. You can see how much both the talent and the amount of time these actors had to actually develop their attachments to these characters and get into the depth and the fiber and get to understand them inside and out. How that just completely informs and enriches how they portray these characters. It's just so much a very interesting thing to see how these two actors work off each other in that scene and how it ends up paying off at the end of the film. But there's so many good things in this sequence that it's just like, it's not the big bombastic acting blockbuster scene that some people might have thought you were looking for, expecting to get from the hype that the film was giving you. But once you understand that this is what's servicing the film, and it has all these two characters working just very subtly off of one another and developing their characters and creating that sort of nexus this film really has, that these two characters connecting and having this very interesting relationship continues to fuel the film as it goes along. How you go from this scene over into, like I said, the bank heist and the shootout, and how it progresses from there, how that scene at the diner informs how Hannah keeps going forward, how McCauley functions, how McCauley knows that Vincent Hanna's a guy who just doesn't give up. He keeps doggedly chasing you until he has no other leads left. So it's a very interesting thing how that fuels and informs these characters moving forward throughout the whole rest of the film, up until that climax where you finally have that scene where you have Neil McCauley making that split decision. Do I go off on the plane and leave everything behind? No. He goes ahead and he's going to go after Wayne Gro. And once everything just falls into place, where Vincent Hanna is freed up from his obligations, from his marriage, everything just like finally is all disassembled. He can go off free and clear and not have any of that baggage. But now Neil McCauley is the guy who has the emotional baggage, making decisions based off of passion and impulse instead of following his very rigid code that he had at the beginning of the film, which shows very much the difference between the two characters here, that Hanna very much is a very adaptable type of figure, that he can work spontaneously and kind of roll and move around this entire world and make split-second decisions to kind of keep on top of things, while McCauley has to follow this very rigid, narrow type of path that he has in front of him, and as soon as he veers off one way or the other, he doesn't really know how to work and maneuver in that type of world. So once he starts veering off that track with Edie, he starts making these more passionate decisions that leads him further down the wrong path, leads him to going after Wayne Gro, which is the whole downfall of the whole thing, that he makes that impulsive decision at the completely wrong moment in time, where he's completely free and clear, but chooses to go ahead and follow his passion, follow his impulse, follows that one little nagging thing in the back of his head that he can't get rid of, that's been nagging him the entire film in the form of Wayne Gro. So you can see that where Hanna is the guy who can adapt and move and kind of work around these whole situations, and once he is freed up of all that other baggage, he can go off and just be the lean version of himself, where he doesn't have to worry about all this other stuff that goes on in his life. He can be very focused and determined and get the thing done, And just that wonderful thing how, again, that conversation the two of them had in the diner feeds into and informs how these characters move forward. That once Hannah sees this one woman sitting in a car in this massive chaos going on around him, whether it's subconscious or not, he realizes this is something that's out of place, and he zeroes in on it, and it's completely the thing that just drives everything forward. That you just see, again, that fantastic moment where McCauley realizes Hannah's coming for him, he's right there, and he has to walk away. That, again, goes back to that rigid code, that 30 seconds flat philosophy that he repeats throughout the whole film. So you keep having this great thing where all these things that have gone throughout the entire film feed into and inform and develop the characters and the situation further, and just comes down, and once you have everything else stripped away, all the other character arcs, all the other characters, all the emotional baggage, it is just focused in on these two characters in this final cat and mouse chase that is so masterfully crafted by Michael Mann, with the tension that it has. It just doesn't go for a lot of bombast and whatnot. You don't have the score kind of going off in a very big way. It's feeding into the tension, the slow burn nature of it. Just this wonderful chase that they have, and how it just builds to this very great crescendo and everything, where you just see these characters don't have to say anything. They just show it in how they're photographed, how Niro and Pacino play the scene, how they just start using their cunning, their intellect, as they're trying to hide in the LAX runway and everything. You just see this type of thing just play out so wonderfully with the long takes, the precise cuts, all the little things that they do that just kind of have the characters move their eyes around and kind of realize how their strategy is going forward. And you just, at this point in time, seeing the film, if you've never seen it before, you just don't know exactly how this is all going to play out, how exactly this is going to happen. But again, you had that whole thing set up early on in the film with the two of them in the diner, saying that whatever happens, even if we've sat down here, we've gotten this sort of bond between one another. If it comes down to it, I'm going to blow you away no matter what it takes. Whatever it is going to become between you and I. It's going to happen. One of us is going to pull the trigger. One of us is going to be dead at the end of this whole thing. And just a wonderful sort of, again, crescendo, a build-up, a culmination of all these little things that have built out throughout the entire film, how you've gotten to know these characters and care for these characters. And again, when McCauley walks away from Edie, there's almost a heartbreaking demeanor on his face that you just see. He doesn't want to have to walk away from this woman because he does truly love her, but he realizes he's just in a situation where he has no other choice. So all these things just feed into this and create such a wonderful climax that, again, just strips everything else away, at least it just as these two characters, which was the main point of this film that kept Michael Mann going through all the whole years, developing the script, focusing in on McCauley and Hannah, and how their communion kind of builds up through this whole film, and just see how these two characters are so unique to one another, and just form this symmetry and symbiotic type of relationship that once you have that moment where Hannah sees the shadow and plugs McCauley, it's a fantastic moment right after that where you see that there's almost a sadness on the face of Hannah, that he almost like wish he didn't have to do it, because there is someone that just a reflection upon him that he could see out there, that there wasn't just this one person out there that was just the same as he was, and just like without one or the other, you could probably almost feel like they've kind of lost something, that this soul out there, this spirit or whatnot, this person out there that just had the same exact type of qualities and the same sort of mentalities as one another. The heightened experience of their lives being this violent type of scenario that they put themselves into day in and day out, you almost feel like they could possibly lose something of themselves killing the other one. But it's such a great moment there where they clasp hands after everything's finished and know that the life and death situation is past them, and just like they can just have this moment here right before Neil passes away. It's just a beautiful, wonderful moment where you just have that Moby music coming up in the film, and just having this very fantastic operatic type of moment of sorts where it's just silent and introspective and reflective, and just wraps the whole film up in a fantastic package here. I think the film of Heat, done by Michael Mann here, is a wonderful piece of crime saga dramatic storytelling that I don't think in 20 years anyone has quite hit something of this scale and this depth overall and this complexity, to really hit it off on such a fantastic level, to really rival it in every single aspect that it has to offer, between Michael Mann's style, his writing, his direction, the wonderful performances you have here, and the complexities of all the characters you have involved with this storyline. I think it's a magnificent film that has gone on to influence other filmmakers throughout the years. Most notably Christopher Nolan with The Dark Knight. He very much saw that this would be a Batman tale wrapped up in sort of a crime thriller aspect. There would be something spanning across a whole city, dealing with overall concepts that have a lot of depth and a lot of nuance to it, to really kind of wrap it up as sort of a Michael Mann Heat allegory in a superhero type of fashion. It really did inform so much of that, and there's so many different filmmakers, I'm sure, have looked at Heat and see what that has to offer and see how they can capture a very contemporary neo-noir type of energy and style with their films that doesn't have to be overly stylized, but it can still have a subtlety, a fantastic, excellent, sort of exquisite realization of a vision overall in a sort of crime thriller aspect. Films like Drive from Nicholas Winding Refn and so many other things really kind of harken back so much of what Michael Mann has done for this genre. But Heat, I think, is just the full maturation of all the types of concepts he had built out from Thief and Jericho Mile through Miami Vice and everything else. It really just brought it all and brought it to full fruition in Heat. That's almost to me, it is a nagging point in the year of 1995 that this film, despite the fact that the Warner Brothers and everything put big ads in Variety magazine to kind of put it out there as an Oscar contender for many different awards, it got completely ignored at the Academy Awards that year. Not a single nomination for anything at all. Not cinematography, not any of the acting performances, not the screenplay, direction, best picture, absolutely nothing. Heat got completely ignored by the Oscars that year, along with many other films I absolutely love in the year of 1995 that very much fit into this same sort of genre and everything. That's just such a total crime, such a upsetting thing for me, because Michael Mann, even for the film that I feel is his best film, The Insider, even though he did get nominations, the film got absolutely no wins. So it's like, even when Michael Mann finally gets his foot in the door, they still don't give him anything for it. And it's just a complete crime that Heat did not get any awards. But the fact of the matter is, the legacy of a film means more than a gold statue. That over 20 years later, that Heat still stands up as a fantastically masterful piece of cinema. Whether it's crime thriller, drama, anything, character pieces, it still holds up and still has the influence and the inspiration. It still has so many great things to offer for anyone who's not seen it before. It still stands up so magnificently well. And the fact that you can transcend awards and stuff like that and all that type of thing, where you can just have the legacy cement its place from decade to decade, that is a fantastic thing. And so Heat from Michael Mann is definitely one of the best crime thrillers ever made. If you guys have something special to say about it, I definitely implore you, put your comments below, start some discussions about what really you truly enjoy about Heat, what nuances of it really kind of catch your eye and embrace yourself to it. So let me know, guys. There's so much stuff to enjoy about Heat. I just love how Michael Mann also used so much of technical precision in this film, like he did back in Thief, to really kind of get very accurate and very realistic and authentic type of qualities between the cops and the criminals, the handling of arms, all these different things. He's very much nuanced and detail-based, but where Heat is strongest, where some of his recent stuff really falls off, it still has the depth and the quality and the character and the emotion to drive forward a fantastic narrative backed by his wonderful style. So, thanks guys for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.